Welcome back to our panel discussion, The Business Case for Cloud Computing in Government, sponsored by Vion Corporation and Hitachi Data Systems Federal Corporation, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Rich Campbell, the Cloud Solutions Architect for Vion Corporation, Harold Watkins, the Acting Chief Technology Officer at the EPA, Andre Mendez, the Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and Pamela Dyson, the Chief Information Officer at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And before the break, we were talking about the elements of SLAs and how you make sure that the cloud provider can give you what you need in terms of service level agreements. So let's move on to Andre. What are the elements of your SLAs, and how do you make sure that the cloud provider can do what you need?
The broadcasting world is kind of maybe a little bit of a unique animal, because as you guys know, right, your SLA is basically 100%. You got to be on the air. And with all of the involvement with applications and systems behind the scenes that are totally integrated in order for you to produce your final products and distribute them all over the world, you have to have everything operating all of the time. So, our SLA's requirements for our vendors are always in the 5-9 type of category, right? And they have to be strictly abided by. And so, we are very, very demanding up front. This is long-standing. If you think about broadcasting all over the world and having your data, your video streams going over satellites, right? You can't afford downtime, right? And so the same is true nowadays in the streaming environment. The same is true for better or for worse, even on email, because systems that do notifications of email for traffic systems, for metadata systems, they're all interrelated. So for us, the availability and the SLAs associated with them are absolutely crucial and very, very high intensity. So we're very careful about that negotiation up front. But what we found so far, we've been extremely pleased, and, I'll knock on wood, is the fact that the vendors that are out there that have gone through all the certifications, that have established the reputations that allow them to be top tier and to provide services to government agencies that go through the proper due diligence, are really doing a very, very good job. This is an industry that has matured extremely quickly, and that is light years ahead of where it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. And so I think that is, a very good indication of things to come. My biggest concern, quite honestly, from a security standpoint, and the fact that as that entire infrastructure becomes so absolutely important and vital to the economy of any developed country, that it will become more and more the target of both cyber attacks and actual physical attacks. And so, but those are things that they have to be prepared for, but that far supplant the typical reliability associated with IT systems from a breakdown of disk drives and the old problems that you used to have. Really night and day from even 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, okay, so failover is something that's part of that also, I guess, especially when you have to be 100% on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything less than full backup across data centers, especially with geographic diversity, is becoming far less than acceptable. I always joke that the shortest time, known to man is the time between your email system going down and the call from the CEO, right? And so that is just a reality. And, when you go out there and you make the contract for that hosting and for that service to be provided, that's the kind of expectation that you have. I don't know how my colleagues feel about it, but, again, we've been very, very pleased with our vendors that have passed all of those certifications.
All right. Exactly what Ms. Dyson said earlier, right, is it's no longer just the hardware and the software components. It's also, how do I access it? Where's my access coming from? And, is my service going to be up regardless of where it's located, right? That's really becoming a key factor in service level agreements today.
And Harold, what are your chief SLA elements?
When it comes to look at it, really always goes back to the requirements of the customers and what they really need. The second piece that is looking for any kind of red flags that may introduce customized SLAs, which is going to drive up your costs. So really try to weed out much of those as we can early on. The third part really is monitoring. You have to be able to monitor exactly what you're being provided, whether it's up, whether availability is there per SLAs. And then the key part of this really is incentive, disincentive, right? If those services are not available, if there isn't a recovery, there isn't a failover, then what's the disincentive to your vendor for recouping those costs? In the consumption model, when you're buying these services, it's critical that you pay for what you get or you don't pay for what you're not using. So that becomes very critical.
And when it comes to monitoring performance, do you have your own monitors in place, or do you have a third-party outfit that might monitor for you and the vendor, or does the vendor be able to provide reports that are accurate for you?
And it's both. I mean, because obviously the vendors typically will provide you dashboards and things that show uptime, service disruptions, any kind of changes to their particular environment, and they make that available to you. But it's also incumbent on the agency to do their own monitoring, to say, well, we're showing that the service is not up or there are issues and we need this looked into. So it's a two-way street.
One thing that I found is that when you really look at your business case and your business, in general, the cost provisions associated with SLA non-performance become almost irrelevant, right? I mean, if somebody tells me, oh, no, if I don't abide by my SLA, I won't charge you for that period of time or even that month, it means nothing to me. If I'm off the air for 10 minutes on a critical broadcast into, China or Russia or, do I really care about that $15,000 that you're going to give me because that link was down? It doesn't matter one bit to me, right? I want 100%, right? Because that money that you're going to give me back does nothing for my business case and for my ability to service my clientele.
Yeah.
For the SEC, it's about collecting money. So there are fees associated with filing. If our systems aren't down during a period of time and people can't file, we lose money. And someone from Capitol Hill will call me and ask me to come up and talk to them about why. So I agree. The incentive, disincentive, the incentive for us is to stay up 100% of the time because we provide 99.99% internally. If I'm going to go outside, I'm going to push you on your SLAs harder than what I can provide because that is a part of the business case. I would never step back from what we can provide internally.
So the opportunity cost or opportunities lost are true and measurable items that matter to your agencies.
Absolutely.
To a certain degree, they're immeasurable because they're so large. Sorry about that, Harold.
If the chairman is having a town hall across the country and Akamai drops a link, as Andre referred to, that's a missed opportunity. There are thousands of people who didn't get that broadcast.
And it's also a reputational issue for the agency,
correct.
too.
Absolutely correct.
A federal agency can't even keep a broadcast going or a webinar going. Sure. Harold?
Absolutely.
Right. In a case where there is clearly you have disincentives for where the service is not available, in an instance where that's occurring a lot, then one of the key things you have to structure in your contract is also be able to get your federal data from that cloud provider and go to a different one. That's going to give you the availability that you need. And so that's a critical piece department agencies really have to think about.
And I think that is a part of the strategy going forward and the business case and making the decision to do that. What if this goes badly, right? And if you haven't built that, the extraction question, if you don't have that infrastructure to mirror that internally to pull it back, then you have to go out and negotiate with another vendor. You're going to be over here with one that you're not satisfied while you're negotiating this new agreement or you don't have the infrastructure in-house, and that's going to be a problematic service for you. So that's one of the things that when we talk about best practices with other agencies, there needs to be more discussion about what does the exit process look like if you have to come out of one of these vendors and go to a different provider.
Yeah, I remember many years ago, a purchasing manager, a major computer manufacturer said, we look at everything we build as future landfill. And so if you look at the life cycle of the relationship with that contractor, it might be that you have to put extraction or departure or kumbaya at the end into the SLA.
What's the exit strategy?
And a lot of that's what we're seeing a lot of, right, is a lot of our customers are kind of demanding that. They're saying, not just do we need an exit strategy, but we also want to know how that cost model is going to impact us, right? And we see that. I've had several government customers that have come to us and said, the exit strategy is cost prohibitive, so I couldn't go with that particular vendor. And that's a big part of how SLAs are built today.
Yeah, so it's a hope but verify type of situation.
Correct.
Because, again, a part of that exit strategy could be you need a hot alternative if you have to move. Where are you going to move it to quickly? If you don't have that built, you're going to be living with a vendor that's not providing a good service for you while you negotiate an alternative.
And a disaster could hit a particular location, too, and so you have to have that COOP element, even if it's another company, possibly.
Yeah, that's usually built in. But if it's bad service, how do you plan for that?
And if you see a big dirt hill next to a data center, and it's rainy, maybe that's not the place to put your federal loads.
Yeah.
All right, I want to get to the heart of the issue then and just kind of have you describe what are the elements of the business case, how you make the final business case, who you make it to, and what are the elements you're looking for besides uptime. There's also financial considerations, and so on. So, Andre, why don't we start with you?
Sure. A substantial number of elements, moving really from a capital investment into, an operational investment where you no longer have to deal with the life cycle refresh of a lot of the technology is very important. The skill set associated with operating these, very, very sophisticated environments, and the fact that you no longer need to provision for that, extremely high level of technical expertise is important. The number of people that, as retirements come about, you replace, because all of a sudden you're no longer servicing, 450, 500, 600 servers, but you're dealing with one contract where all of that is provisioned. All of those come to the table. Real estate is extremely important. For us, in the Cohen building, we had 11 data centers in 2009. We now have 3. And there's been a substantial diminution in footprint. And when you're paying Independence Avenue rates for real estate, and you can give some space back to GSA, that's always a good thing. And then the item that Pamela addressed earlier in the conversation that I think it's almost always or often overlooked, and that is the fact that if you rely on the vendor's disaster recovery ability, that takes an enormous amount of what is basically non-performing expense that you have on a regular basis just from an insurance standpoint, and that you're much better off with somebody else taking the risk, doing an investment on leveraging economies of scale, instead of you having to go through, the whole set of, secondary servers, tertiary servers. It just makes no sense. So when you look at it, it's actually a relatively easy business case to make. Because the economies of scale are so compelling from a cloud standpoint, and your requirements keep going up and up and up and up and up and up. So it is for me a very easy business case to make on a variety of fronts.
And when evaluating a cloud provider, do you look at their level of internal automation, for example, for provisioning servers and switches and other pieces of hardware infrastructure? That can be done automatically, or it can be done by wire pullers and people typing?
That really depends then on the level of cloud, so to speak, that you're provisioning, right? With some of the cloud where you're doing your own provisioning, with a web interface, and you're preparing a server for this, a server for that, and you're doing some of that yourself, and then they deal with all of the infrastructure requirements. That's a very important component. It needs to be very easy to use. But I believe that with all of these vendors, they are under tremendous pressure by virtue of competition, and I'm sure Rich can talk to that at length, to be completely optimized and to have their own supply chain totally optimized so that they can bring to the table not only the best price-performance ratios that allow them to compete with everybody else, but also because they have the management in place that has that reliability and that SLA provisioning that allows them to be long-standing concerns rather than fly-by-night companies that come up and then go down.
All right, so Harold, how do the requirements and the service level agreements and all of this wrap up into your business cases?
Obviously, the SLAs and requirements that we talked about. Also, the obvious cost parameters that you want to look at for any kind of business case. But the other part that's very important is really impact to the mission of the organization. Is sort of the qualitative part of that. How is it going to impact the organization? Are they going to be able to deliver the mission and be more effective at doing that? The other consideration there, too, at least from an IT standpoint, is being able to now deploy your customers or your skilled technical staff to do other things. Instead of spending a lot of time on what I call the daily infrastructure operations that we all have to deal with the uptime, but now you're able to focus more on strategic alignment, more on the business relationship with your customers within your organization to deliver more value and leveraging technology.
So we can call that the innovation dividend, if you will, for cloud.
Precisely.
Okay, I should copyright that phrase.
So I agree with all of that, but just to add, one of the other factors that we take a look at is speed to deployment or speed to production. Certainly an internal build is a lengthy process, especially in the federal government, as you have to go through acquisition reviews, security reviews, full competition, and so forth. So leveraging the cloud can shave several months off of that process, and we can get something deployed quicker than that. So that's one of the things that we take advantage of. The other thing is agility. One of the uses that we're looking at for the cloud is for our lower environments, for our development environments, our proof of concept, spinning up storage and servers quicker so that we can do testing and proof of concept before we even dive into a development action. So one of the things that we can do, if you're working a portfolio of 120 projects, you have to, and half of those at a minimum have to go through development. One of the things we really believe we can leverage the cloud to do is to build these environments for testing, proof of concept, and so forth. So in addition to all of the cost savings and the skill sets, because we don't have data architects and data migration people sitting on a bench, there's also a business skill set in the acquisitions office and the finance office that I don't think has been realized yet in negotiating and executing these contracts. So in addition to having those skill sets, it's really a speed to market, speed to production for us, and also for these one-off environments, where we can spin up server capacity, storage capacity, pretty much within minutes.
So nobody's standing with
so
their
no
punch
one is
cards
storming
at
there,
3 in
right?
the morning.
So right now we're building
them.
out even virtual servers. Even when you have a template and a footprint to build those, that's a high cost. I've got to keep network administrators and those folks around to build that stuff. Throw a lot of that in the cloud and redeploy those skill sets to do something else.
All right, and Rich, we're going to give you the last 30 seconds.
Well, I agree with everybody. I think that the thing for me as being an architect and specifically, for my company, one of the things that we really look at is how do we handle that agility and that time to market. And that's what a lot of our customers are truly asking for. They want to know that we have those abilities and we have those, abilities ready to go when they're ready.
All right, good place to stop right there. We are out of time now. Great discussion. I want to thank today's guests, Pamela Dyson, the Chief Information Officer for the Securities and Exchange Commission, Andre Mendez, the Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, Hara Watkins, the Acting Chief Technology Officer at the EPA, and Rich Campbell, Cloud Solutions Architect at Vion Corporation. I'm Tom Temin, Federal News Radio 1500 AM.
On behalf of Vion Corporation and Hitachi Data Systems Federal Corporation, thank you for joining our discussion. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate will receive an email with download instructions immediately following the webinar. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you very much.